Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming for 3 days. And over the next 3 days, as you might have seen in the itinerary, we're going to be doing a bunch of things. We're going to be doing a bunch of talks, and then we have a pitch competition. We're going to be having a hackathon in the background, and then networking will be going on. You'll be meeting a lot more people. People will be showing up and joining you as the tech weekend goes along. Quick intro about myself. I'm Yasmeen Butt, and I'm the co-founder of Founders Village. I started Founders Village 2 years ago when I exited my previous company. I was a psychologist running a mental health company. And then initially the idea was that, in my journey of starting my company to exit whatever I'd learned, like if I could just like share it with like other founders. So initially this started off as like a fun activity in my house. I hosted the first founders night in my backyard. And back then it was pandemic and like we didn't even have like a lot of founders in the city. But then I hosted a barbecue night in my backyard and I told everyone it's a founders night, and 95 people showed up in pandemic. And someone came to me at the event and they were like, would you do it again? And I was like, sure, if you sponsor it. And they sponsored it and we did it again. And there were like 125 people. And then I went back to WeWork and I was like, maybe like we should keep doing this. So I asked a bunch of my Series A friends, I was like, would you sponsor it? And they were like, sure. And we did another one and there were like 275 people. And then we did another one and there were 425 people. And then my neighbors called the cops. So it was very clear back then that, what we were building was pretty solid. And we were doing things like in a very laid back and like casual way. Like all we had was a backyard. I would make like 500 sandwiches and make kaftas. We would grill burgers on the spot. And we used to have this like one bench in an entire backyard. People would come up and stand up on the bench and then pitch for 60 seconds. And then they would pull up their Venmo and people would Venmo them money and would call it crowdfunding. And then we funders saw the photos and they were like, if you're doing crowdfunding, why don't you do it through our platform? And I was like, yeah, but you'll have to sponsor it. And they were like, okay, send us an invoice. And then I was like, I don't even have a company yet. So we incorporated the company just because we wanted to send an invoice. And then it was just like a fast forward from there on. Like it was November 2021 when we started. And then in November 2022, we did like 34 events. Like we were doing like back to back, like every single week. And the agenda remained the same, that just get like the smartest, most courageous, great founders in a room, founders, investors, and engineers, and then see what happens, right? So this is what you'll see in the next 3 days, that a lot of people like come out of Tech Weekend, either they've found a co-founder or they've got a, seed check, or like they've made a, partnership with like a company, or like found a user or hired engineers. So the goal is that whatever we need in the ecosystem is already there, right? All we have to do is we just have to like meet each other. So without any further ado, I would like to call our panelist. Actually, I would call Jacquelynne, who's moderating our panel from seed to Series A, actually from like 0 to Series A. And this is a topic that we've been hosting on repeat, but every single time we like to invite like different speakers. We like to invite founders who've raised a seed or Series A to share their experience of like how they went through this journey and what were some of the things that kind of like set them apart from like other founders who could not raise money, right? So I'd like to call Jacquelynne for the session. So please give her a big, huge round of applause. Thank you. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. How are you today? The sun is out after raining for like 3 weeks, so all because you're here. I have two amazing panelists today, and I think it's really good because it's two different journeys, two different stages, so we get a different perspective on everything. So what I'll do now is I'll introduce each of them. If you want to do a quick 30-second, maybe 2-minute blurb about yourself so they have an idea of who they're or who I'm talking to. I will start off with Sheridan from Lendtable. Give him a round of applause.
Hey, great to see everyone. So quick background on me. My name is Sheridan. I'm the founder of a company called Lendtable. We're in the fintech and retirement space. And what we do is we help people take full advantage of their unutilized 401k match and employee benefits. So specifically what that means is, say you're a Walmart worker, you have access to a $3,000 401k match and you're not using it. We will loan you the money. You'll then contribute it into your 401k. Your company will match it. And the way that we make money is we'll take 20% of the money we help you earn. That person then gets to keep the other 80% they weren't getting in the first place. I've been running this company for about 4 years now. We have a team of about 30. We've raised about $30 million. Should I do any other personal background or keep it there?
Yeah, let's keep it there. It's up to you.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
Then we have Vera, the founder of Atrix AI. Give a round of applause.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? Happy lunchtime. Super excited to be here. Thank you so much for hosting the panel. A little bit about myself. My name is Vera, founder and CEO of Atrix AI. We work with medical affairs teams of pharma and med device companies to help identify patient care gaps and resolve them. So if you've been to a doctor and they've recommended any sort of medication to you, they've likely interacted with a medical affairs team. And that's who we service with our tech, and we're a seed stage.
Wonderful. So what I want to do today is, the last time I did this panel, last Founders Village, we didn't have enough time for Q&A. So I'll do about 30 minutes of questioning, so then I can give the audience about 20 minutes to ask them what you're thinking. I want to touch on 3 things though. I want to touch on the most important thing, which is everyone in the room is probably trying to do right now, raising. And then I want to touch on pivot, because I'm sure a lot of you have different journeys where you're unsure and the idea, or maybe you have pivoted. We have some serial entrepreneurs that have done that in this room. And then the last one is product market fit, right? You have a product right now, you believe in what you do, but how do you go out there, educate the market, because of what you guys do, it involves a lot of education. Educate the VC world, why do they have to make this investment, and make your first sale, right? You want to be profitable. So let's start with, just to jump in it, let's do raising. So we all know this is a competitive startup ecosystem right now. In your humble opinion, when you were currently raising, and also if you were raising today, if you're not, how did you differentiate yourself with the ecosystem when you were raising? What did you do specifically to say, hey, this is what I did different in this subcategory. This is why you should invest in me. So if you, during that time, and hypothetically, if you were raising today, how would you say that, given the fact that a lot of companies right now, or a lot of VCs are heavily investing in AI right now, and a lot of other companies that have great product market fit are not getting that round of funding? Does anyone want to take that?
Sure, happy to. So, I think there's kind of 2 ways I would answer the question. I think in the earlier stages, pre-seed and seed, it's really about, a lot of it is about the team and the potential market and potentially what insights you might have into the customer, because that's really going to give you that unique differentiator. What's kind of interesting to this question with my current company is we didn't actually start in life sciences, and we started by applying AI in MarTech. And as you guys know, MarTech is very heavily crowded. So when you think about fundraising in a MarTech space, how do you differentiate? Well, it's probably one of like the harder industries to differentiate. And part of the reason why we actually started to verticalize and focus on life sciences was, exactly to this point, and realizing that, from a sales cycle perspective and getting customers and traction, I didn't want to spend half of my conversations trying to differentiate amongst like 100 other solutions. And life sciences is a very niche focused vertical with very nuanced customer needs that we could service. So basically TLDR is really understand your customer, go talk to them, try to find that unique insight. For us, it was verticalization. And the team and the market opportunity is probably the most important thing anyway.
Yeah, so I'd absolutely second everything she just said right there. I think team and market, especially when you're raising a pre-seed, is the biggest thing that these kind of VCs are looking at. Like if they know you're going into a huge market, they think that you're an incredibly compelling team, even if they're not the most sold on the idea, you can still raise, you can still raise around. I think for my business, we actually had a bit of the opposite problem. So we had essentially what we do, that kind of lending for 401ks. There were no other products in market for it. And in some ways, that's really good because you're bringing a new product to the table. It's clearly something that they haven't seen before. But with that came a unique set of problems. The main question is just like, why am I to believe that this is going to be able to be a $10 billion company and no one else has thought of it before? So actually what we had to do is we kind of, even though we were doing something new, we pattern matched with other companies. We showed Affirm, Klarna, Afterpay, these other businesses that are doing buy now, pay later, earned access wages. And for us, that was really important because we could show, even though this is a novel kind of wedge to get into this market, there's a lot of other examples for how people have built very large businesses using a similar model, but focused on a different market. And then on top of that, we also had a kind of unique issue where a lot of the VCs we were talking with, the concept of not using their 401k match didn't make sense to them, just because VCs typically have more money, so you don't necessarily understand a lot of those problems. So having a lot of those customer stories, being able to really walk them through the market, the experiences the average person goes through, even giving them interviews with other people where they could really see firsthand that experience was super important.
And,
oh, go ahead.
and if I may riff off a point that you made, so what was really kind of interesting about life sciences in particular, especially when you talk about market, which is really important to communicate at the early stages, is oftentimes in life sciences, it's very hard to define the market because there actually aren't numbers around it. So like medical affairs, right, which is the team that we're targeting, if you try to Google right now, like what's the market size of medical affairs, literally nothing will come up. But it's important, right, for me, if I'm trying to fundraise, to be able to explain that. And with that, to your point, using existing companies in the vertical. So Viva is a big success story in life sciences in terms of being a proxy to what the market potential of a business in a category could be, really helps, I think, from a fundraising perspective. So I just wanted to highlight that as well.
I love how we're transitioning sooner than later. So let's talk about this. Okay, so you found the product, you did your market research, you really want to educate the market. To your point, right, matching ESPP and 401k, I'll start with you and then I'll continue with you, is a lot of people, and I'm one of them, when I started a job in my early 20s in tech, there was matching. No one educated me on that. It was until later in life I was like, why didn't I exercise this? You have that education with the VC, you get that round of funding. How do you go then educate the market and saying, this is an important product for me and this is a good fit for the market? Again, there is a lot of education involved for the both of you, and I'll touch on you next. Like, how do you make that connection, the disconnect connect?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing for our business too is that we knew that there was a problem for sure. So you have $24 billion of unmatched 401k contributions, 25 to 50% of people, it's about 50 million people not using their match. But the initial problem that we ran into is it's a very odd concept to talk to people about that. When you're saying you should take out this loan from us, which will help you somehow save for retirement, especially a lot of the workers we work with naturally have this aversion towards working with lenders. So a lot of the customer education we kind of did was hands-on. We'd go to Walmarts, we'd go to Targets, we talk with kind of Apple employees. I think a great way to do it was just like talk with friends. We were in a fortunate spot where a lot of the people that we knew in our own circle, we could kind of product test, we could test a lot of the marketing materials, a lot of the sales and kind of copy. But yeah, I mean, really to start, it was a very kind of hands-on approach with having these conversations with people, understanding what they were confused about, what they were worried about, how they were talking about it with their friends. Because yeah, as kind of mentioned, we were in this interesting spot where we knew that these people had this problem. We knew that people were letting up the money. We knew that the economics made sense. But that still doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a high demand for people to use it, because there's that kind of education and trust barrier is a big one as well, especially when you're dealing with a lender, when you're dealing with retirement services. That's something that is incredibly personal and also a complicated topic. So you need to make sure that you can kind of build up that trust, as well as really educate people as to how the economics work and simplify it into a way that they can understand.
And then Vera, for you, a completely different subject is, or along that same lines, is the life science space, and that space in general can be very archaic, right? So having a system like yours utilizing an industry that is so archaic, how do you educate them and say, hey, like you need this, and especially with different policies, right? Like, so where are you at with that right now? And like, how are you educating the market on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in life sciences, obviously a very regulated industry, right? And typically one that is slow to adopt any novel technology. For us, we're an AI company. We leverage LLMs, right, which everyone here knows about. And when we look at doing enterprise sales, which is effectively all life sciences is, and that's like a whole separate beast than doing SMB or mid-market sales, and we're selling into medical affairs, which also is, they're a technical function from a perspective of being PharmDs or MDs, so they might understand science, but they don't understand necessarily LLMs or how AI models are done. So a lot of our sales process, I mean, at the beginning especially, is actually giving them a primer and being able to translate complex concepts of AI, Gen AI, LLMs into language that they understand. And the way that we do that is by focusing on the problem. So AI actually doesn't really come into the conversation at the beginning at all. We work with them to really identify what their problems are and then slowly kind of educate them, if AI makes sense as a solution, why it does in a language that they understand. So education is just a heavy part of the sales cycle, and it's absolutely required. With enterprise sales as well, it tends to be a lot more consultative than like a typical mid-market and SMB process. So education effectively is sales. So yeah.
Before I leave the topic of raising, a common question I get from the audience members in different panels I go to is how you go about putting your pitch deck to the VC world. I saw a debate between two founders in a recent panel where someone's like, I'm very strategic. I don't share my pitch deck. I need to know who I'm talking to before I send it to them, and then I'll send it. I have another that puts it on Twitter and that will post everything and that will blast every single VC or investor out there. I mean, again, what are your personal thoughts on that, and how did you go about doing that?
So I can start. I think, much to your point, I think there's so many different ways that people have kind of raised money. It can be very dependent on the market, the kind of business that you're in, just general timing and luck. I think some of the maxims I kind of use, and it also kind of depends on the round as well. But I think if we're talking about pre-seed, trying to raise your first round of funding, a big thing to be cognizant of, I'm a huge believer that warm introductions are the absolute best way and really kind of like the only way to talk to some of these VC funds. So even if you don't know any of these VCs, if you don't know any kind of founders, going to events like this, meeting founders who know other VCs, getting a warm introduction is a great way to get to the top of their inbox. I also think that even kind of managing the people at the firm that you talk to and who's the actual decision maker is an important thing to be cognizant of. Personally, I'm a little more hesitant, and this is at least what we did for our pre-seed, to start with a pitch deck. A lot of the times what can happen is when you send a pitch deck, that's essentially what they use as kind of your presentation and your pitch. I think a better way to do it is to have an in-person conversation or have kind of a remote meeting, walk them through it. You can send kind of materials after the fact. But I personally have kind of held off in the past of being first to kind of send out that pitch deck. And then on top of that, I think, kind of manage it like you would any sales process. Create a CRM for it, understand where people are in process, really try to kind of push people to the finish line. And I think momentum is a really big thing and kind of important thing to do. So you want to try to condense that timeline instead of just, it's really easy to have these conversations push out months and months and months and months. And if you think about it from the incentive of a VC, if they believe that they can invest at the same price 6 months from now, a year from now, there's very little incentive for them to put in more money now. Because if in a year from now they get the same price and they get more information, why wouldn't you do that? So there are ways that you can kind of drum up this excitement and this momentum, and that'll kind of catalyze the round. I also think, if you have a co-founder, something kind of logistically to manage is have someone kind of full-time on the fundraising process, pushing that forward, and someone full-time kind of managing the business. I've seen sometimes where kind of both co-founders do it, and then the metrics stall. And that can be really difficult because a lot of the times, especially if you have metrics to begin with, it's really important that you kind of have that growth. And if during the process and during diligence, all your metrics flatline, that's the next thing they're going to bring up in the board meeting when they're talking with, the rest of their LPs and their GPs. And that's not kind of the pitch you want to have.
I think all of those are really great points. And I know this is a subjective perspective in terms of, or people have different opinions on whether to share a deck or not. I think now, especially having also done enterprise sales, I'm definitely pro having a face-to-face conversation because it's just so much more dynamic. It can really create an engaging discussion and can help you also learn patterns, just like you do customer interviews, right? Like your entire fundraising cycle, you're effectively gathering feedback and learning how to adapt your narrative to get to your outcomes, and also how do you communicate what you're doing as a business effectively to VCs, just like you would learn how do you communicate your business effectively during a sales process. I also understand from an investor side, right? They want to be mindful of their time, so they're trying to kind of qualify or pre-qualify companies before they get into that discussion. But I think from your perspective, you should just engage in a face-to-face conversation. And then to your point around warm intros, so my previous company, we raised our pre-seed round like purely from cold outreach. Like I actually didn't know anyone. It is much more work, and it is a lot easier for me to do it now, just given network. So I think warm introductions definitely help, but it's not not possible to do it cold. And I definitely encourage it. I mean, we got some incredible people on board that responded cold that like, I never thought, we would ever get an opportunity to interact with. So don't leave it off the table, but it is more extra work to do. And the last thing I'll also add to what you were saying is running a process is really important. I think outside of figuring out your narrative and what you're pitching, just being really diligent about your time. Get everyone in, over a 4-week period, all meetings at the same time. So you create those because they all talk to each other. So you don't want to delay the process. Just do it all at once. And, it'll probably work out. You kind of have to have faith that it ultimately will. But being diligent in that process is so critical. And I think it can be, because there's uncertainty in the fundraising process, and be very anxiety inducing. So you just have to like mentally, just trust that it'll all work out.
Yeah, and to a point around face-to-face meetings, could not agree with that more. I think if you can do face-to-face is the way to do it. That's one of the huge advantages of being in San Francisco. This sounds kind of simple, but also practice it. I know a lot of founders where the first time they do it is when they're talking to Andreessen or some fund. And especially if you're someone who's maybe a little bit more introverted and kind of get choked up in those meetings, it's great. Like if you have founder friends, if even just like regular people, not in startups, just walking them through your pitch, having them give you feedback, not all of the feedback you kind of want to take into account, but it just gets you in the rhythm. At some point when you've kind of done enough of these pitches, you can just recant it without looking at anything for 30 minutes straight. And I think it's good to kind of be in a position. One other thing, and this is definitely something I've had to say for myself, is actually to talk less. I've definitely realized that sometimes, it can kind of feel like you're just selling, and you're just trying to get these people to invest. But at the same time, like these VCs are also looking for companies that they are selling to. That's part of their job. Like they're trying to make a pitch to you. If they really think you're a compelling company, it's important that they make a pitch to you so that they can get allocation in your round. So I think really leave kind of the opportunity for them to ask questions, them to kind of dig in, and be cognizant of how kind of concise you are in your answers, because it's not that you shouldn't have a much longer answer for things, but I think erring on the side of being concise and then being able to go much more in depth if people ask is an important thing. But couldn't agree enough with face-to-face, 100%.
Yes. And I actually want to emphasize that again, because like what I've learned from enterprise sales is my Zoom conversations versus if I meet them in person, like pipeline moves so quickly and it's such a trust builder. And it's definitely changed my mentality even when it comes to VC fundraising, because especially during COVID, right? I mean, if like we raised for my previous company during COVID, it was all Zoom conversations and you're kind of forced to be. And I think that's a little bit continued. So there's probably a lot of fundraising still happening over Zoom. So I think actually trying to meet in person can put you in an advantage from just a relationship building perspective. So I would like highly encourage, if you do in person, just do in person.
I like this transition we have going on right now. You said previous company, and I know that you have a previous like endeavors in the sneaker business. So I'm actually going to start with you this time, Vera. If you want to tell them about your journey, because in total you raised about $7 million in funding, which is remarkable, right? Tell me about your journey and the different type of, pivots you've had and like the lessons learned. And I'm going to transition that afterwards to you and that same question.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, so many. We could be here for a couple of hours. So my previous company was a plant garden marketplace, consumer focused. We went through YC, lots of interesting learnings. I think growing a consumer company, we ended up shutting that down for several reasons and brought over the team and started this new company, which is totally like going from consumer to B2B enterprise with no previous enterprise sales experience has definitely been a fun transition. Personally, I'm a fan of B2B for various reasons. So I think that's like a whole learning thing. In terms of I think, okay, so going to second company, I think the biggest thing, and you probably have seen this on Twitter or have heard this like repeated over and over again, and it's so cliche, is like first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution. And it could not be like more truer. It's like your product almost, especially in enterprise and B2B, is like irrelevant unless you can get a customer. Go build a product, but if you can't sell it, it doesn't, that's my subjective opinion, it almost doesn't matter. So our biggest priority with the second company was let's just go sell. Like we didn't even, like we had started maybe like some prototypes, but we just tried to sell a contract. And once we could close a contract, then we started building out the product. And when you think about life sciences, very long sales cycles, it's the same thing. Other interesting learning is that in terms of iterations and pivots is when we originally started with this company, we started in MarTech, then pivoted into life sciences. And then we actually didn't start with medical affairs. We started with pharma marketing and a totally different problem space. But how we ended up in medical affairs was because of distribution, where we realized once we started doing our sales cycle, we weren't getting traction with marketing, but for whatever reason, medical affairs was responding. And I didn't know anything about medical affairs. So I was like, okay, well, they're clearly responding distribution wise. So like if we can make a sale to them, like that's where the business should be going. And then we ended up doing customer discovery with them, really understanding their pain point. And that's how we ended up in the space. So I would say like the biggest thing, and I know people say it, and sometimes you have to learn the lesson by making the mistake like I did potentially with the first company, is, you know, distribution first and foremost, because revenue is what's going to drive your business regardless of whether you get VC funding or not.
Yeah, and for kind of my journey, so I've been building kind of startups in different iterations since I was 15. You could say this is like my 5th, 6th, or 7th company, kind of depending on the way you look at it. And I think all the businesses have been very different. 2 of them were kind of venture backed. A couple of them were just kind of lifestyle businesses. Some shut down. Some I got a liquidity event from. Some are still kind of ongoing. I think the biggest kind of takeaway from the experience with Lendtable, and this is particularly relevant being a fintech business, is having a core fundamental grasp on your unit economics, really understanding how you think that this is going to scale, how you're going to grow into it, much to the point you're making on kind of the importance of sales and kind of distribution, really understanding what your channels are, what it costs to acquire there, really feeling like you have a strong grasp on the customers that you're serving, what are their real pain points, what are their real use cases, how are those things growing. I think a basic one is kind of co-founder selection too. Like really feeling confident that the person that you're working with is someone who you have kind of a lot of conviction in. I think those are all kind of like really core fundamental tenets.
So you've raised that round of funding, right? And I'm going to start with you this time. We'll talk from seed to Series A. We'll talk on the seed side. How did you utilize that round of funding as far as scaling your company on both stages? What did you make use of that? The secondary question to that, instead of me going back and forth, is hiring someone outside of your bubble. Let's say you have your co-founder. It's really crucial to hire top talent, but it's also very expensive, especially if you get around a seed round and you have a limited amount, but you want to scale. When you're hiring your first person, like what do you look for and how do you target that talent, knowing that you're with the sales forces in the world and you want to be competitive and mindful with your finances?
Yeah, so remember the first question one more time?
The first question is when you got your seed and when you got your A, what did you do with that funds?
Got it. Yeah, so an interesting thing kind of as a fintech lender, we kind of have a dual fundraising purpose. So we both raise equity as well as raise debt. One of the things that you need when you're kind of raising debt, there's typically something called an advance rate, which is principal you put up as you kind of make out the loans. So there's an allocation of money we put towards that. When we started, it was just my co-founder and I, and then the team grew to about 30. So headcount, we put some money behind kind of sales and marketing, understanding kind of efficient acquisition channels. And then kind of to your second question around, sorry, I'm blanking on that one as well.
It's okay. It's my fault. I'm chatty, y'all.
No worries.
It's hiring top talent, right?
Yeah,
you want to hire outside of your bubble, but you want to be mindful and competitive at the same time. What did you do?
Yeah. So this is one thing where I think we've really changed our hiring methodology over the past kind of 2 years. I think when it comes to like benefits and kind of offerings there, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to highly compensate someone as well as they would at Salesforce, at Facebook, at any of these companies. And I also don't think you should kind of have to. I think if someone's looking for compensation like that, they're legitimately better served going to one of these much larger organizations. You're not going to be able to provide that level of stability. I think finding that cultural fit, really finding someone who's passionate, who feels purpose with the thing that you're doing, with the kind of results that you're trying to drive. And also someone who is along for the ride. Like, there are certain people, they want to go to a big organization. They like the stability. They like being able to work on, a small part of a gigantic organization. And there's some people who have a natural inclination, like they want to kind of take on that risk. They want to really have that kind of flexibility and ownership and take on a lot more responsibilities. And you're trying to find people who are kind of really, really looking to kind of take on that new set of responsibilities. And also, I think this is something certainly the case if we look over the past kind of couple of years. I think a mistake we made initially when we were hiring, especially, there's abundant access to capital. Everyone was kind of able to raise. I think it was easy to kind of think that headcount growing and team growing was a metric of success. And I think that is absolutely not the case. I think all you know that happens for certain when you bring on more team members is you get additional complexity. So it's not necessarily the case that if you go from 5 people to 25 people, that your organization is going to be moving quicker and doing more things. I'd actually say that the only thing you know for sure is that your organization gets more complicated. Now, that doesn't at all mean that growing headcount is not an incredibly important thing and can enable you to do all these things. But I think it's really important to be kind of cognizant that when you are making that hire, you are really confident that this is someone who is going to be additive to the team. And you don't feel like you're just hiring because, well, I just raised some money and hiring's the next thing to do because that's why I have money. Yeah.
So I'm going to start with the hiring first, and I'll work backwards. So definitely agree with all of those points. It's funny because I feel like with my last company, we definitely overhired too early, and it does introduce a lot of complexity. Like for each incremental person you hired is not necessarily like the same level of incremental outcomes you're going to gain as a cohesive team. And almost now I'm like the other extreme where it's like I feel like we have to be so underwater where I'm like, I feel like that is the justification for when we would hire a person. So like we're recruiting right now actually because like we're so underwater. And I was like, okay, I feel okay allocating capital to bring someone on board. References. The biggest thing out of anything you do in an interview process, always do references. Always figure out, always do it. Even if it's references they give you, there's ways you can ask questions to kind of suss out certain things about that individual. That's probably the biggest success determinant in my subjective opinion. And then, I think to your point, obviously like qualifying culture fit and the skill sets, it's honestly going to be dependent on what role you're recruiting for. I'm also in the early stages, a big fan of contractor and international hires. Like one of our engineers that's been with me, previous company to this company now for like 4 years, we've worked together, is in Europe. Hiring full-time employees in California gets really expensive. There's a lot of liabilities. California does not make it friendly for small businesses. And that's something you learn when you hire and there's mistakes made. So now I err on the side of just contractor hires. And if you hire in California, it needs to be a specialized skill set. And you just want to make sure you allocate a lot of capital to support that employee. On the setting like the milestone side. So if you've closed your round, the hard work really starts on the execution. Fundraising is not the thing that should be celebrated. It's nice to have capital and resources, but like building a business that drives revenue or hits product market fit is always your core priority. I think the things that I think about, like for example, with this company for our next round is, from a business side, what outcomes do I think intuitively, given what I know from the market, I would want to achieve that are indicators of almost like go-to-market fit and then also product market fit from a business side. And then knowing that you might need to raise your next round, what is the narrative that you would like to be able to tell at that point and how do you align those? And typically the investors that you bring on board should help you refine that because you might not know, what do investors expect for a Series A for an enterprise B2B company? That's going to be very, very different than consumer, right? So I think it's important to work with your existing investors and also think about what is the ideal you want to achieve from business and also fundraising narrative side. And ideally those merge.
And I think to the point of milestones, a big thing that I kind of realized over the past years is a lot of the times you can be thinking about, all right, how are we going to hit Series A? How are we going to hit Series B? How are we going to be able to raise kind of hundreds, billions of dollars? But I think a big thing I kind of realized is the fact that if you are exclusively focused on just like how do we raise that subsequent round of funding and actually put you in a disadvantageous position when it comes to fundraising, the best time to fundraise, the time that all VCs want to put in money is when you don't want or when you don't need their money. OpenAI is a great example. Everyone's trying to give them money. They don't need the money. They're in a great spot. So I think if you really focus on what are the core fundamental economics behind the business that is actually going to make this a long-term profitable enterprise, even regardless of that helping your kind of ability to fundraise, it's going to put you in a position to be able to fundraise more. And it also makes it so you're not beholden on having to kind of raise that next round if kind of the time comes.
And to that, one example of a company in life sciences that I very much admire in the fact that they only raised the seed round and then they IPO'd in 7 years was Veeva. So I think in total they raised maybe 4 to 7 million and then they never had to raise again. And that's really wonderful because I feel like probably, as you scale, you have a board to manage, you have investors to manage, and that effectively probably becomes more of your full-time job than actually like working on like the product and the business that you do in the earlier stages. So I think there's a lot that should also be celebrated about getting a business to profitability and being able to scale without VC funding. And if you need it, that's great. That's also fine.
That's the dream, by the way, 4.7, and then no, not raising after that. There is something that I got from a previous panel that a founder shared, and I thought it was quite interesting when we were talking about hiring the first employee. Because of the market right now, a lot of the big tech companies are laying a lot of people off, and she needed her first sales hire. So she found one of the big tech companies that laid off a bunch of salespeople, and they were in the same industry bucket, and she reached out to all of them. She hired her top salesperson, her first salesperson, and they're doing really well right now in the market. So like that was a really good tip that I got, is like looking at big companies and seeing those that are laying people off and getting top talent for your startup was a good piece of advice I got. I want to be mindful of the people in the audience because I know you have some questions. So I'm going to leave it to maybe one or two, but I do want to touch on this. My journey in tech, I always hear the word YC, and YC is pretty much like the the creme de la creme of accelerators, right? So we have some founders here that are trying to get into YC, I'm sure, or, notable accelerators. You came from YC. One is, what's your journey in YC, and like, what did you learn from it? And then what did you do as a company when you were applying for YC that you thought, made you get in YC?
Yeah, so we were part of YC Summer 20. I think we were part of a very unique batch. We were the first fully remote batch, so there was definitely a lot of kind of hiccups and things that they were kind of generally figuring out. Quite frankly, our application process to YC wasn't all that different from kind of the experience of pitching other investors. I'd say the core difference is the fact that it was so much quicker. Like, you do the interview, they grill you for 10 minutes, you kind of go through it. But really, the recommendation I'd give for how to get into YC is very similar to the recommendation I'd give for how to kind of talk to other investors, and just how to kind of build your company in general. I definitely don't think you should be relying on it as kind of a linchpin to be able to catalyze your business. The best way to get in is, again, be in a position where you don't necessarily need the money, where you don't necessarily need to get into that program for this company to be successful. I'm trying to think if there's anything particular about how we applied that was interesting. No, I think just being really diligent with kind of how you respond to them. Definitely, this is where practicing absolutely comes in. I think with how condensed the interview process is for it, you really need to be snappy with your responses. So that's where it's really important to kind of run through it with other people. You can easily find a whole lot of other YC founders who are kind of willing to do it with you. I'd also recommend just applying around. At the end of the day, there is some kind of random chance that happens with all of these different programs. So I'd apply across the different incubators. I'd get a feel for kind of other people in the space. And as far as kind of learnings, I think some of the things that I took away that were the most impactful: one, demo day is great. It is a great catalyst to be able to fundraise. You get this huge density of kind of investors that are looking at you. Signaling is certainly something. I think the community was awesome. That's definitely what I took away the most from it. Just being surrounded by so many different founders, working on so many different things. It's such a conducive environment towards meeting new folks and figuring out how to pivot and thinking about how to hire. And I think certainly if you're a first-time founder, if someone was let's just say they lived outside the US and have never done a company before, I would say hands down, no question, you should do it. There's even some, I think, late stage companies, Series A, Series B companies that I saw join YC just because they were kind of foreign and they wanted to get acclimated into San Francisco.
Yeah, definitely agree with all of that. I think especially if you're a first-time founder or YC, if you get the opportunity to be a part of a batch, definitely do it. The community that you get to build, the advice, the level of expertise you're surrounded by. I feel very grateful to have participated and to have the community of founders that you can connect with regardless of where you end up ultimately going. So hands down, if you get the opportunity for prep, exactly that, just practice your pitch because it's very condensed, and focus on talking to users, understanding the problem, and getting traction, because that's what YC cares about. So if you want to increase your chances, that's probably the best way, just like with any other investor.
And per YC too, I think it's also, if you're on the fence about going, doesn't hurt to apply. You can always get in and not take it. That's even a useful thing you can use in kind of future fundraising rounds. We got into YC, but we decided not to go with it.
I didn't even think about that. Very good advice. Okay, I'm going to leave it to two more because, again, I have to be respectful for you guys. Mentorship. We have some early stage founders here. We also have founders that are in areas where tech isn't a big thing there, right? And they're moving here or they're flying here to find basically their village, founders village, shout out Yasmin, to help build their company and to get ideas. When you first started looking back, how did you find your village and how did you find like the mentors out there? Did you reach out to people in the market on LinkedIn blindly, or how did that work for you?
Yeah, so this is something that I actually feel like I've done a very good job of kind of in San Francisco. It's why I was so kind of appreciative of the opportunity to kind of move out here. I think it's a little difficult. Like if you're reaching out to someone to kind of be a mentor, that feels like a lot of work for them. Like there's not necessarily some clear benefit to it. There's a lot of other people that could kind of mentor. I think a more natural way to do it is you're going to these kind of events and communities. And the biggest thing, if you can find ways to just help out people, like you meet some investor, hey, I know a bunch of other founders, I know a bunch of other people doing other stuff. You're thinking about this market. I'd love to talk more with you about this market. Something that one makes it so there isn't a job that they have to do. You're building a real relationship. They actually kind of want to talk with you. And the biggest is if you can just find ways to be helpful, find ways to kind of get involved in what they're doing. I think that is a much better kind of catalyst. Also, I'd say same kind of feedback I gave is kind of to YC. I wouldn't use it as kind of a linchpin. Like I think at the end of the day, it should never essentially be required to kind of have this mentor. You should be in a good spot kind of with or without it. But being in this open spot, I also think certainly being in San Francisco too, I believe in the adage of closed mouths don't get fed. I think if you're open and asking for help, there's a lot of people out here who want to go out of their way just to give advice and give feedback. So put yourself in kind of a position to be able to get that help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think community, effectively, let's summarize it in one word, tapping into communities and building relationships and doing it authentically. And I feel like almost naturally over time, everyone has something that you can learn from, no matter where they are at in their journey. Even like a recent example. So when I got into life sciences, I didn't know anything about life sciences. I don't have pharma connections, like don't know anything about selling into pharma, et cetera. And it's a pretty hard, that's what people say, pretty hard industry to like break into. And I was like, okay, well, what's the best wealth of knowledge about selling into life sciences and how to build companies selling into life sciences? Well, other life science SaaS founders ended up starting this like little like chat thread with, whatever founders that were selling to life sciences, and it's now grown to like 50 plus people. And that's a wealth of knowledge. And that's in a way, it's like contributing by creating a space for people in a similar industry to be able to connect and help each other out. And as like kind of like a selfish benefit, like I get to learn from everyone. So I was like, this is perfect. And now we organize events and like exchange insights. So I think community is just such a big part of learning and kind of getting that expertise. It doesn't have to be one person.
My most cliche end note here. Actually, I was going to go with what's one piece of advice you can give to everyone in the room as a takeaway, but I know that's like a question everyone asks you to end. So I'm going to do a twofold question. That's one. Your second one is a lot of us overwork. I know some of you are probably even working since 3 a.m. and then you're here now and you're also trying to raise. What's one advice for work-life balance? Like, how are you not burned out?
That's a hard one. I feel like, there's going to be parts of your journey where you're just going to have to work crazy hours because it's what's demanded, right? Like it's going to be waves, ups and downs. And I think it's almost up to you to figure out what is kind of like that minimum thing that will keep you grounded and balanced, like despite all of the chaos, good and bad. So like for me, it's like, I will never sacrifice running. So like I will always, no matter what, 30 minutes, I will always run or meditate. Those are the two things, no matter how chaotic things are, I will absolutely always make time. I will never let anyone cut into that. So I think it's just, you have to kind of determine that minimum of what you're comfortable with. But I think kind of what it all ties down to is to maintaining your health. Because if you're not functional, you're not going to be able to think clearly. You're not going to be able to execute on your business. It just has all these ramifications that are easy to forget when you're like working 24/7. So.
Yeah, I can't reiterate that highly enough. I think, biggest thing to prevent burnout, work out, eat well, sleep. I know that there's some founders out there who are orders of magnitude more successful than me who seem to not do that. I don't know how they do that, but that would definitely be my kind of a, personal recommendation. I think on top of that, as far as like biggest kind of point of feedback is certainly for people who are thinking about doing a company, best time to start is now. I'm not sure kind of the background of everyone in the crowd, but I think a lot of the times people have some kind of hesitancy on when should I start a company? What if I don't have the right idea? I think even if you're working somewhere, even if you're in school, you can just start working on businesses on the side right now. You'll get a feel if you actually like it, start having these conversations. All of these things you can kind of find online. You can find all this information, and certainly being in San Francisco, there's just a massive, massive group of people that you can spend time with, and people want to help you out.
Yeah, it's literally, it's never the right time, and no amount of, there's never a playbook for like how to start a company, or how, there's advice and expertise and people can share their experiences, but there isn't a playbook. So like, I know for me, I can get into a mindset where I'm like seeking information because I have to have like the perfect solution before I like start executing on something. And like the reality with building a company is there just isn't one. And like, trust yourself, you'll figure it out. I don't know the playbook for enterprise sales. Just fuck up a lot in the process, and then like you'll figure it out and like get comfortable doing that and just start.
Yeah, and I think also on the burnout point, I'd say like find someone that you like to work with. I really can't emphasize enough how important it is just to like be friends with the people you're working with, and certainly with your co-founder or co-founders if you have them, and also just care about what you're doing. Burnout's inevitable. At some point, you've done 100 enterprise sales calls, not a single one has gone through, and you're like, I actually fucking hate this. But the best way to kind of ride through that storm is just by doing something you like and care about that lets you kind of deal with that. Yeah.
Really sad that you both dropped the F-bombs in the end, not the beginning of this.
It's all out.
Oh, no.
Let's give them a round of applause, everyone. They're amazing. Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic around. Does anyone have any questions? We have like a few minutes here. I'm going to start with you, and then you're next. And then you're next.
Hi guys, great session. So how did you decide the problem you wanted to work on? You just, don't get me wrong, I'm a first-time founder doing this for 4 years. And did you just like bump into it? Did you eventually come to it? And the second part is like, how did you sort of find your first 3 guys or champions who would be like, yeah, I'll pay you for this. This looks great. So when did the problem become a product? And when did you feel like, okay, this product is now ready to scale out? Or did you have that insight? So just, yeah.
Well, I'm curious to kind of throw the question back at you with what you're focused on now. What do you feel like the answer would be for you?
Yeah, so I wanted to say more, but I just tried to be succinct. And for me, the hardest part was like getting those conversations when I was trying to solve the problem. So where I started was what were the gaps in my competition, so to say that, yeah, this market has been proven. There's a market for this. There's a pretty big market and it's going to grow over the next 3 or 5 years. So let's find out what the gaps are. And that's where I pivoted. But at the same time, you also have to have an aspect around how different you are from the market, how forward thinking you are, right? So it's sort of a balance, and I really don't know the answer. I'm just figuring it out. So
I think, or what high level like comes up for me is always talking to, whenever I would get to a point in a product, whether it was my previous company or this one, in terms of like navigating from MarTech into then life sciences, starting on pharma marketing and then going to medical affairs, it was always talk to the customer. Whenever I was stuck, it was always like, let me have more customer conversations. And they could be like discovery conversations. You're not trying to sell them. You're like asking them for advice. And like, that's how you reach out to them. Because usually by digging into those pain points is where you're going to have that intuition, given all of the research that you've done, that it's like, okay, this is what's not being addressed right now in the market. And then go off of that and try to have more conversations to see if you can validate that. That's kind of what kind of comes up for me.
makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and I think to the question of kind of idea selection and how do you think about what kind of problem you're going to go after, I'm definitely an example of someone who's always erred on the side of just doing it. Like I think I've worked on a lot of ideas that are bad, but I'm very happy that I did that. I think that sometimes people can get very stuck in finding that perfect idea. And really the way you end up going about finding it is by executing on it. Like there's a lot of people that have had every billion-dollar company you can think of right now. I guarantee someone had thought of that idea before.
Great point.
And I think so much more of what you discover, like the actual value creation that you're doing there is not in the novelty of the idea. I genuinely think everyone's thought of all of these ideas before. People have absolutely thought of my idea before. It comes in the execution. So I think if you err on the side of just executing and building towards it, you get a sense if you like it, you uncover a lot more of these pain points. Yeah, and then when it came to kind of first customers, for us, we had an easier thing of I I know a lot of people with 401k matches. I'm going to hit up all my friends. I literally told them I will not be friends with you unless you use the product. They're like, I don't know if you're going to fuck up my 401k. I'm like, we're not going to be friends. It's up to you. So threats would be my recommendation. Yeah, violence. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is
Yeah,
awesome,
scare-
guys. This validates my way of thinking. But
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was saying scare them. That's called sales. But totally, it's all ideas are a dime and a dozen. It's really all about the execution and learning from customers, and that's how you identify. And sure, you could do like the market research, and I think there's also the intersection of like, are you excited about the space? Like, I love learning about all of the different drugs and medical devices and like all of the science behind it. I might not be an MD, but it's entertaining for me. So it's like I enjoy that part of it as well. So there's that piece. Hopefully you can find an opportunity, but it might not be something you're like personally excited about. So that's something to also consider.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's been super helpful. My question is actually related to what we've been discussing, right? So one of the things that you spoke about was focusing on distribution first and, trying to find customers who are willing to, pay for your solution even before you've built it. My question is, what are some strategies that you can use to convince them to pay for something that doesn't even exist right now? Like, how do you build that relationship to a stage where you get them convinced enough to pay for something that's still in development?
There's probably like 2 or 3 buckets. And by the way, I didn't know any of this like going in, because like everyone also would tell me like, yeah, like sell the product like before you build it. And I was like, how am I going to do that? And there's kind of like 2 to 3 buckets where things can fall into. So one, you could be like pretty explicit about getting what's called a design partner and be like pretty transparent around, or transparent in voicing that in your sales cycle. So talk about, we're looking for design partners. This is what we're thinking of building. We'll give you like a discounted price for that. And that sets the expectation. You're kind of going to design the product and build it out with them. And then they're getting a discounted rate for kind of that investment. So there's that component of it. With enterprise sales, it's like fairly consultative. So you could also take the approach of, let me kind of do more service-based. So that's the other way to start, where it's like you don't need the product, but then in the process of like doing the consultation, you're effectively trying to productize at the same time. And then you can then like sell that full product. So those would be the 2 buckets.
I see. Okay, this is super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and for our business, we weren't necessarily selling anything that didn't exist. We were actually giving them money, which is a different kind of pitch when you're kind of doing lending. I think one of the easy hacks you can use to start is, YC says it all the times, but do the things that don't scale, do the things that are free, do product hunt, go to your friends. There's even kind of hacks where you can give someone a small amount of advisory shares for kind of coming on. Like, you've got a lot of these different things that you can kind of leverage. And even if your product right now is not in the position where it actually makes sense for them to use it, what are the other things this decision maker cares about that they would actually want? Maybe they want something else on their resume. Maybe they want to help companies. And I think finding that kind of like beachhead target customer to start is really important. Like, you've got this huge aperture of people you can serve, but who is the most likely person that is going to want to use your service right now, and going after them first.
And one nuance also to add to this is my advice, I feel like, is applicable perhaps more to like mid-market enterprise sales versus if you're building more like SMB product-led growth, then it's like, what's the minimum viable product you can kind of hack up, and like someone should in theory be able to pay for that. But like the ACVs are like, $10 a month versus like, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Makes sense. Thank you. So just a quick background. I am a first-time founder, just started a few months ago, and I'm focusing on enterprise sales mid-market right now, right, on the sales side. So this is like super relevant advice. Thank you. Yeah.
Just go try and sell, and you'll figure it out. No one has a playbook.
So I have a lot of people interested, very willing customers, but at some point I do need to fundraise. And I guess I'm stuck between, because I know a lot of people in the accelerator world, like, where do I focus my time, and what's, do you, for the first time founder, go the accelerator route, or should you focus on, finding maybe an angel investor or something first that really loves your mission, or like something like that, where I have to be judicious with my time. And some of those application processes are like pretty involved. So I guess what advice do you have there?
So I'd be on the side of that. When you're kind of fundraising, it is a full-time job. I think it's a very difficult thing to do part-time. Do you have a co-founder by any chance?
Yes.
Okay. Like, I'd say if one person can be full-time focused, next month I'm going to block out my entire calendar. I remember when we were raising our seed, it was literally like 9 to 5 fundraising calls, applications, fully managing the process. And that seems like it's a huge time suck now, but what ends up happening is a lot of the times if you don't do that, huge drawn out protracted process takes 6 months. You don't know where people are at in process. So, I mean, I'd say, especially, still in this market, apply. If you're thinking about doing an incubator, apply to all the incubators. If you're thinking about talking to angels, talk to all the angels. And on top of that, I think a lot of people get, I don't want to say hung up, but they really want kind of like, we're going to do a $5 million round and we're going to get some lead. And while I think that's great, I think what's also awesome is you'll get a lot of angels who are like, yeah, I'll put in 25K or 50K or 100K. And that builds momentum towards your round. So I definitely wouldn't shy away from having those smaller checks, because a lot of the times those people are a lot easier too. Like if you're trying to get money from Sequoia, you might take you 10 calls, versus if you're talking to an angel, they might just be like, I don't know what you do, but I like you as a person and you seem kind of chill. So here's $50,000.
Yeah, I would say just the way that you're prioritizing your time, and if it's fundraising, just focus on it like a full-time job. And if you have a supporting team, just make sure you have SOPs in place where like the business can kind of continue. But like your full focus for 2 to 3 months is like just fundraising. I'm a solo founder, so it's like for me when we raised like our round, I mean it was hard. Like I had to figure out how to how do we like keep executing on the business, but like my time has to be focus on fundraising. But that's just a reality. Like you have to do it and trust that like in 2-3 months time, like you'll get wherever you'll get, and that'll help you, and then go back to the business and then just focus on executing.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for 2 more. I did see someone in the back, and then you're next. And then afterwards, if you want to go to the founders, you can go to them directly. So let me pass the mic to you.
Cool. Hello. Thank you so much. I, as a side project, regularly ask the same set of questions to a bunch of SaaS founders and then kind of share out anonymized information from what they say. And one of the things I always ask is like, what's the next question I should ask? What do you want me to ask another founder? And the most recent one that they've asked is, what's the closest you've come to giving up? So like the actual story, what happened? Why was it? Why were you in that situation? Hard question, sorry.
I can start. So this is the closest we've come to giving up, or like the most recent time we thought about giving up. I mean, I think a very interesting thing for our business is, I mean, every business got whipsawed over the past kind of couple of years, but particularly in our industry, like when we started, beginning of COVID, everyone was talking about how we're removing benefits. I remember I just quit my first full-time job 3 months in. I'm like, God damn it, I really timed that incorrectly. Then, market goes absolutely crazy, all this kind of free access to capital. And then, take 2 years later, you're in the position where rates have really spiked. How are we thinking about direct-to-consumer lending? How are we thinking about kind of managing this new rate environment? And that was less of thinking about quitting. It was more like there were fundamental shifts that are happening in our market and to the unit economics and kind of business model as we think about it. How do we think about persisting in this space? How do we think about transitioning to maybe a new distribution path, a new way of kind of financing the business? So that was definitely kind of like a critical juncture where we really had to kind of like reevaluate, how do we think about the unit economics? How do we think about this new environment? What does that mean for our business long term? Yeah, and that just gets to the thing I was kind of saying before of like, advice I'd give to kind of founders who think about the business, like really have some grasp as to what your unit economics are now and how you think about it at scale. And yeah, just really a fundamental kind of understanding, at least as to how you perceive this kind of market evolving over time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like there's like an unfiltered answer and then there's the filtered answer, but I feel like, I wouldn't use like the term giving up. I just think as a founder, because there's such a roller coaster that you have to make hard decisions, whether it's, the market's like turned, whether it's co-founder issues, whatever it might be. I mean, with our previous company, we had to make the decision of shutting it down and we had capital remaining. We decided to return it. So I wouldn't say like that was a difficult like transition to go through. I also had like a health scare at a certain point, which is why I talk about like, you got to add your, I had like a lump appear like overnight, had to get surgery done. And that was like my body's way of saying like, you need to slow down and figure out how, to take care of yourself. I wouldn't say it's like anything to do with like giving up, but I think you because you can go through such extreme experiences, it's almost like the environment's way of forcing you to self-reflect and either adapt from a business side or be able to figure out how do I myself be able to like go through this. But never was it a thought of like, oh, I'm like gonna, quote, give up. Like I like, despite all of the trauma, so to speak, that you might go through, there are such fulfilling elements to the process and the journey. And I think it was never a thought of like, oh, I'm just, we'll give up. You just figure out how to make it work kind of thing.
Yeah. I also think one of the kind of hardest balances with being a founder is you both need to be someone who's fundamentally really resilient, but someone who's really good at quitting. That's a huge superpower. Like if you're great at shutting down your company when it comes time to shut down your company, like she very well could have been running her company for the next 2-3 years and it stayed in the same spot. And she was far better off having kind of stopped it at that point. I've stopped many companies in the past too, but it's definitely an interesting kind of balance of, how do you think about kind of weighing, like sometimes you just need the resiliency to get through this period. And what are the other times where you're like, time is your most valuable resource. At the end of the day, there's this infinite kind of aperture of other companies and other things you can be doing. So how do you really kind of decide, is this what I should commit to or not? Definitely don't have a great answer to it, but I think people who can do both, like people who are great at quitting, that is absolutely a superpower.
And I think oftentimes like going through like with the quote quitting process or like shutting down the company, because for us as founders, it's like the company is like our life. So it seems like it's this big thing, like are people going to judge me? Is it a failure? Like all of these thoughts like go through your head. But like the reality is like it happens all the time. It's not really a failure. Also VCs like make 5 million different investments. Like they see companies shut down all the time. So it's like now having like gone through the process, I don't think it's like as scary as it might seem. And that might be the case with a lot of difficult decisions that you make and then ultimately get through. Is in retrospect, it's not as maybe as scary as it might have seemed in that moment.
Thank you, Sheridan, and verify all information. So the question is really for you, Sheridan. You said a couple of things to me that really resonated. You said one, you wasn't a big proponent of sending out the pitch deck. Then you also said you was actually launching a company that the VCs probably didn't resonate with the world of 401k. So with that being said, so when you had those meetings coming to the table where one, you didn't have a pitch deck, and two, they probably didn't resonate with what you was actually showing them, how would you actually structure that meeting to really sell that story so they can actually see the vision of your company?
Yeah, so I mean, specifically the way I think about kind of like raising a pre-seed round is the biggest thing you want to emphasize, and this is what I can see a lot of founders sometimes not do when they're first pitching, is really talk about the market, really talk about the team. Like, again, if you can get them to have conviction that you are an incredible founder, your co-founders are amazing, everyone in your team's incredible, and you're going after some huge market opportunity, I'm sure that there were some VCs who invested in my business who like legitimately did not believe in like 401k matching and this kind of lending concept, but they're just like, I think Sheridan and kind of my co-founder Mitchell are compelling enough and they're going after a space that's potentially big enough that they're going to make it work. I think to the kind of second point though, of, how do you actually show to them, that this kind of market exists? For us, what we were able to do is just pull up a whole bunch of data on it. Like, I know you might be thinking that people are able to contribute to their 401k, that this isn't a problem. Here's all this other data we can show where that's kind of not, where it says against that and shows how it kind of is a problem. And also stories that they can kind of understand. Like if you're giving them something that's completely outside of their world, what is some digestible format? For us, what that ended up meaning is, all right, this is a new kind of company, which in some ways is good, again, because it's novel, and in some ways it's bad because they're like, why would I believe this is going to be a big company? Let's show, hey, this is going to be the Affirm or Klarna, but for employee benefits. This is going to be the earned access wage where you can see all these other billion-dollar companies. Because while I think that VCs are looking for novel businesses, they're also absolutely just pattern matching. Like their whole goal is, how do I know that this person and this founder is just like those other billionaire founders? And if they can believe that this is a similar kind of idea and similar path, just going after a different kind of vertical, you'll be able to raise money.
And I know that, I will add to this because where there are parallels is that a lot of Silicon Valley VCs don't really understand why, like they might know biotech, but they actually don't really understand life sciences. So a lot of what I have to keep in mind when I'm fundraising is how do I take the complexity of what we're doing and translate it into a language that is understandable. And I think to that, using other examples and analogies, and literally like the adage of like, explain it to me like I'm 5. And like, how do you do that? And then as you're fundraising, like the reason you want to run this process is you're iterating on your story as well throughout that, because you're getting feedback. Like the first meeting you have where you try to explain something and a VC is like confused, or you get that sense, you're like, okay, well, can I use a different analogy? And then you try it, and then you start to see what ends up resonating, and that becomes the story for the VC. Just for when you do sales, for us, we have to explain AI to someone who doesn't understand AI. So very like similar process.
I lied. You have one question left. I promise. Sorry. It'll be a quick one, right? Yeah. Okay. Last one.
Hi, I'm Juan Cervantes. As context, currently I'm prospect for the Thiel Fellowship of class of 2024. And my question is, how these fellowships and different communities teach different advice than the YC advice?
Yeah, so I was a Thiel Fellow, part of, I think, I'd say if you're looking for advice, the Thiel Fellowship is not it. It's amazing founders, but there's no like programming or kind of like coaching. They'll do meetups. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different communities like that in San Francisco. You could find like hacker houses, you could find these incubators. There's a lot more hands-on kind of incubators you could do as well. Hackathons, and kind of, there's a huge net of these different kind of communities that you can find out there. But yeah, specifically for the Thiel Fellowship, there isn't like any kind of programming that they do, but it is like awesome community of young founders.
And I would just make like a general comment around advice, because you can get plenty of it everywhere, like YC. I'm sure like the Thiel community, mentors, experts, and ultimately part of it is, can you develop an internal framework yourself for when you also receive advice of whether to apply it? Because people have like 5 million different opinions. So whether it's coming from like the Thiel community or like the YC community or whoever else, because there's plenty of advice to go around, and it's all valid. But what's relevant to you,
Perfect. Let's give them a round of applause. Perfect. Okay, so we have 15 minutes. Oh, yikes. We have 15 minutes to stretch our legs, chit chat, ask questions, and then we'll reconvene in 15 minutes, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Good talk.
so they understand.